They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your own blood leaves you drowning in an ocean of indifference? The harsh fluorescent lights of Dallas International Airport cast everything in a sickly yellow glow as I stood motionless beside Terminal C, my black funeral dress clinging to my body like a second skin made of grief. The fabric felt heavier with each passing minute, weighted down by the crushing reality that my husband of 6 years was coming home in a flag-draped coffin instead of walking through those glass doors with his crooked smile and terrible airport coffee jokes. John Michael Miller, United States Marine Corps, age 28. Killed in action while protecting a convoy of supplies heading to a remote outpost in Afghanistan. The official report used clean, sterile language that couldn't capture the way he used to sing off-key in the shower, or how he always left little notes in my lunch bag when he was home on leave. Hostile enemy fire resulting in immediate fatality didn't explain that the last text he sent me say time 0.3s. Can't wait to see your beautiful face again, Mrs. Miller. Save me a dance. I clutched my phone with trembling fingers, staring at our family group chat. The screen showed that both David and my mother Eleanor were online, those little green dots mocking me with their presence. I had typed and deleted my message 3 times before finally sending, "Flight landed at 3 p.m. Anyone available to pick us up? John's coming home today." The silence stretched for exactly 7 minutes. I counted every second while watching other families reunite around me. A soldier in desert camouflage swept a little girl into his arms while she shrieked with joy. An elderly couple embraced their son so tightly I thought they might fuse together. Normal families doing what normal families do when their loved ones return from war zones. Finally, my phone buzzed. David first. Always David first. Swamped at the office today, sis. Major acquisition deal closing this afternoon. Millions on the line. You know how it is. Just grab an Uber or something. You're good at figuring stuff out. Then Eleanor, my mother, the woman who had taught me that love was a performance and affection was a reward for good behavior. Really, Sarah, you should have coordinated this better. I have my book club meeting this afternoon, and then bridge at the country club. You know how important these social connections are for maintaining our family's reputation. John would understand the importance of proper planning. You need to be more proactive about these things instead of expecting everyone to rearrange their schedules. I read both messages twice, then a third time, waiting for the follow-up text that would reveal these were some kind of cruel joke. Maybe a, just kiddin', time 0.3s. We'll be right there. Or, of course we're coming to honor John. But my phone remained silent, except for the cheerful pings of other people's happy conversations. My legs gave out. I found myself sitting on one of those uncomfortable airport chairs, the kind designed to prevent homeless people from sleeping, but perfectly suited for women whose worlds had just collapsed twice in 1 week. First my husband's death, now this confirmation that my family saw his sacrifice as an inconvenience to their Tuesday afternoon plans. 20 feet away, John's casket waited with military precision, flanked by Marines whose names I didn't know, but whose respect for my husband exceeded anything his own family had ever shown him. The honor guards stood motionless, their dress blues immaculate, their bearing perfect. They had volunteered for this duty, these strangers, because John had been their brother in arms. I thought about our wedding day 5 years ago. David had given a best man speech that mentioned his golf game more than my husband. Eleanor had spent the reception telling anyone who would listen that I was settling for a military man when I could have found someone with real prospects. John had just smiled and squeezed my hand under the table, whispering, "Their loss. Beautiful. I get to keep you." The memory shattered when I heard the rumble of vehicles outside. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched a convoy of military vehicles pull up to the terminal. 3 Marines in dress blue uniforms stepped out of the lead vehicle, moving with the kind of coordinated purpose that spoke of years of training and brotherhood. The man leading them had the bearing of someone accustomed to command, his silver oak leaves catching the afternoon light. As they approached the terminal, I stood on unsteady legs, smoothing down my dress and trying to look like a widow who deserved the sacrifice these men were honoring. The lead Marine, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and hands that had clearly seen their share of difficult tasks, approached me with respectful caution. "Mrs. Sarah Miller?" His voice carried the weight of authority tempered by genuine compassion. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Blackwood. I had the honor of serving alongside your husband in his last deployment." I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. This man, a complete stranger until this moment, had traveled hundreds of miles to ensure John received the homecoming he deserved. My own brother couldn't drive 20 minutes across town. "Ma'am, I need you to know that John spoke about you constantly," Colonel Blackwood continued, his voice gentle but strong. "He carried your photo everywhere. He used to say you were the reason he fought so hard to come home. Every Marine in our unit knew Sarah Miller by name because your husband never stopped talking about how proud he was to be married to you." The tears I had been fighting finally broke free, but they felt different than the tears I had been shedding all week. These tears carried gratitude alongside grief. "He also told us," the colonel continued, "that if anything happened to him, we should make sure you knew you weren't alone. John said you had a habit of carrying the world on your shoulders and forgetting that other people wanted to help share the load." Behind Colonel Blackwood, the other Marines were approaching John's casket with reverent precision. I watched them coordinate the transfer with the airport honor guard, every movement choreographed to show maximum respect for the fallen. These men understood something my family never had, that some things are more important than convenience, more sacred than social schedules. "Colonel," I managed to say through my tears, "thank you. Thank you for being here when—" I gestured helplessly toward my phone. His eyes hardened, slightly, and I realized he had probably seen this scenario too many times. Military families abandoned by civilian relatives who couldn't understand the bonds forged in combat, who saw uniformed service as a phase to be outgrown rather than a calling to be honored. "Mrs. Moss Miller, I want you to know that you have a standing invitation to every Marine Corps birthday ball in Texas. John's unit considers you family, and we take care of our own." He paused, time 0.3s, studying my face. "I also want you to know that if you need anything, anything at all, you call me directly. That includes if anyone gives you trouble over John's death benefits or survivor support. We know how to handle people who think military widows are easy targets." As we prepared to leave the airport, I caught sight of familiar figures lurking near the baggage claim area. David stood there in his $1,000 suit, checking his phone and looking around nervously. Eleanor hovered nearby, her perfectly styled hair and designer handbag creating a bubble of expensive respectability around her. They had come after all, but they were hanging back, waiting to see if there would be cameras or reporters before deciding whether to approach. The sight of them filled me with a rage so pure it almost took my breath away. They were willing to show up for appearances, but not willing to stand with me in my grief. They wanted the credit for being present without the inconvenience of actually providing support. I turned my back on them and walked toward the military vehicle. That evening, as I sat in the funeral home making arrangements John should never have needed at 28, my phone buzzed constantly with calls from David and Eleanor. I ignored them all. Instead, I found myself composing a letter that had been building in my heart since that moment at the airport. "To the Miller family and friends," I wrote. "Family isn't about sharing DNA. It's about showing up. It's about presence in the moments that matter most. Today, strangers honored my husband with more respect and dignity than his own in-laws could manage. A soldier has made the ultimate sacrifice, but not for the kind of indifference I witnessed today. John died believing in service, loyalty, and the bonds that hold communities together. His memory deserves better than empty excuses and social media performances." When a local reporter approached me outside the funeral home, asking about the airport scene that someone had filmed and posted online, I handed her the letter without hesitation. By 10 o'clock that night, it was the lead story on 3 local news stations. My phone exploded. David called 6 times in the first hour, his voicemails growing increasingly frantic. Sarah, what the hell are you doing? Do you have any idea how this makes the family look? We have business relationships to maintain. I'm trying to close the biggest deal of my career, and now clients are asking me why I abandoned my sister at the airport. You need to fix this right now. Eleanor's approach was more calculated. As always, she sent a long text message that began, "Darling, I understand you're grieving, but this public display is beneath our family's dignity. What would people think if they knew we were airing our private matters in the media? John was a good boy, but he wouldn't want you to damage your reputation like this. We need to present a united front." I deleted both messages without responding. Within 24 hours, the story had spread beyond local news. Military family support groups shared it on social media. Veterans organizations picked it up. The #presence Not Blood started trending as other military families shared their own stories of being abandoned by relatives who couldn't understand or respect their service. Eleanor's damage control campaign began immediately. She posted carefully curated family photos on her Facebook page, images from Christmas mornings and birthday parties, with captions about eternal family bonds and love that transcends difficult moments. The photos showed a family that had never actually existed, moments staged for cameras rather than lived in genuine affection. The backlash was swift and merciless. Comments poured in under every post. Where were these family bonds at the airport? Eternal love that couldn't spare one afternoon? Your daughter just lost her husband and you're worried about your book club? David tried a different approach, calling mutual friends and business associates to explain that I was having a breakdown and not thinking clearly in my grief. But his explanations fell flat when people remembered seeing the airport footage. The image of me standing alone in my black dress while uniformed Marines showed more family loyalty than my actual family. Instead of engaging with their desperate attempts at reputation management, I drove to the Marine base where Colonel Blackwood was stationed. I found him in his office, a space decorated with photographs of Marines he had served with, some of whom had not made it home. When I knocked on his door, he looked up from a stack of paperwork and smiled. "Mrs. Miller, how are you holding up?" "I need to ask you something," I said, taking the chair he offered. "John used to tell me stories about the guys he served with, about how you all took care of each other's families when someone deployed, how you made sure no one was left behind. Is that real, or just something he told me to make me feel better about the distance?" Colonel Blackwood leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "It's real. In the Corps, we have a saying, semper fidelis, always faithful. That doesn't end when someone takes off the uniform, and it doesn't end when someone dies. John's Marines are your Marines now, if you want them to be. What if I told you I wanted to do more than just accept help? What if I wanted to help other people who are going through what I'm going through?" His eyes lit up with interest. "What did you have in mind?" Over the next 2 hours, I outlined an idea that had been forming since the airport. Too many military families faced the same abandonment I had experienced. Too many widows and widowers found themselves isolated not just by geography, but by relatives who couldn't understand the unique challenges of military life. What if there was an organization dedicated to filling that gap? What if we could create the family support system that the military community deserved? "Mrs. Miller," Colonel Blackwood said when I finished, "I think John would be proud of what you're thinking. But I also think you should know that this kind of work takes resources, connections, and expertise you might not have yet. What if I could get those things?" He smiled, and for the first time since John's death, I felt like I was moving towards something positive instead of just away from pain. "Then I think we should introduce you to some people who share your vision." That introduction led to a meeting with the Sentinels, an informal network of John's former unit members who had stayed in touch after their deployments ended. They were teachers and mechanics, police officers and firefighters, small business owners and computer programmers. What they all shared was an understanding of service and a commitment to taking care of their own. Marcus Hernandez, a former sergeant who now ran a construction business in Austin, had been tracking cases of military families being taken advantage of by predatory lenders and dishonest contractors. Lisa Park, a former corpsman who had become a social worker, specialized in helping veterans navigate bureaucratic systems that seemed designed to frustrate rather than assist. Tony Williams, a former communications specialist, had parlayed his military training into a successful cybersecurity firm. We've been talking about formalizing what we time 0.3s, Lisa explained during our first group meeting. Creating an actual organization instead of just helping people on a case-by-case basis. But we needed someone to be the face of it, someone whose story would resonate with people outside the military community. Why me? I asked. Because, Marcus said gently, your story is their story. The abandonment, the disrespect, the feeling that civilians don't understand what military families sacrifice. But also because you're not just a victim. You're someone who's choosing to fight back constructively. Over the following weeks, we developed what would become the Welcome Home Project. Our mission was simple: ensure that no military family member ever had to face crisis alone. Time 0.4s. We would provide everything from airport pickups to financial counseling, from legal assistance to simple companionship during difficult transitions. But as we worked on building something positive, I found myself drawn to another project entirely. The Sentinel's resources included people with investigative backgrounds, individuals who had learned to gather information and analyze patterns during their military service. When I mentioned my family's sudden concern for their reputation, Tony raised an eyebrow. "What kind of business is your brother in?" he asked. "Construction. Government contracts. Mostly." "And your mother?" "She runs a charity foundation. High society fundraising stuff." Tony and Marcus exchanged a look that made me sit up straighter. "Sarah," Tony said carefully, "would you mind if we did some basic research into their business practices? Not for revenge, just for information. Sometimes people who are quick to abandon family members have reasons beyond simple selfishness." What they found over the next month was a web of financial impropriety that explained everything about my family's behavior. David's construction company had been awarded multiple contracts to build housing for returning veterans, projects that existed primarily on paper. Invoices were submitted, payments were received, but the actual construction work was either never completed or completed so poorly that the buildings were uninhabitable within months. Eleanor's charity foundation was even more brazen in its fraud. Donations intended for military family support were being funneled through a series of shell companies, eventually ending up in personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. The foundation existed primarily to provide Eleanor with a lifestyle she couldn't afford on legitimate income, while providing minimal actual charitable services. "Sarah," Lisa said during the meeting where they presented their findings, "your family didn't abandon you at the airport because they're naturally selfish people. Well, they might be that too. But they abandoned you because getting involved with a military family, even their own military family, would have drawn attention to their business practices. They couldn't afford to be seen publicly supporting veterans while they were privately stealing from programs designed to help veteran." The betrayal I felt in that moment was different from the abandonment at the airport. This was deeper, more systematic. It wasn't just that they had failed to support me. They had actively profited from harming the community John had died to protect. "What can we do with this information?" I asked. "Legally," Tony replied. "A lot. But it needs to be done right, with proper documentation and coordination with federal investigators." "How long would that take?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Well, that depends on how patient you are and how public you want to make this." I thought about John's funeral, which was scheduled for the following week. I thought about the Marines who would carry his casket and the flag that would be folded with military precision and placed in my hands. I thought about the speeches that would be given about service and sacrifice and integrity. I want them to know, I said finally. I want David and Eleanor to know that their actions have consequences, that stealing from veterans isn't a victimless crime, but I want it done in a way that honors John's memory instead of just serving my anger. Leave that to us, Colonel Blackwood said. We know how to conduct operations that achieve multiple objectives. John's funeral was everything he deserved, and everything my family's presence would have tainted. Hundreds of Marines, both active duty and veterans, attended in full dress uniform. The church overflowed with people whose lives John had touched during his brief time on Earth. His commanding officers spoke about his courage under fire, his dedication to his fellow Marines, and his unwavering commitment to the values that made America worth defending. Time 0.4s. David and Eleanor attended, sitting in the front row wearing expressions of carefully calculated grief. They had hired a publicist to help manage their image crisis, and part of that management included appearing properly sorrowful at their son-in-law's funeral. I watched them from across the aisle, noting how often they checked their phones during the service, how quickly they moved to intercept reporters afterward. Sarah, darling. Eleanor approached me at the reception, her voice dripping with the kind of false warmth that had fooled me for years. I hope you can forgive us for Tuesday. We were just so shocked, so overwhelmed. You know how much we loved John. David appeared at her shoulder, his face wearing what I now recognized as his closing a difficult deal expression. Sis, we need to talk about this media situation. It's gotten out of hand. We're all grieving, but we can't let our emotions damage the family name. John wouldn't want that. I looked at both of them. These people who had raised me to believe that their approval was worth pursuing, that their love was worth earning. They stood there in their expensive funeral clothes. Time 0.3s, playing the role of supportive family members while cameras rolled, and I felt nothing but pity for them. You're right, I said quietly. John wouldn't want his death to damage anyone's reputation. He believed in honor and integrity above all else. Relief flooded both their faces, but it was premature. That's why I've decided to make sure his legacy is protected, I continued. I'm starting a foundation in his name to help military families, and I'm going to make sure it operates with complete transparency and accountability. The relief faded as they processed the implications of what I was saying. A foundation that emphasized transparency and accountability would naturally draw comparisons to other charitable organizations. Eleanor's smile became strained. That's wonderful, dear. We'd love to help however we can. I appreciate that, I replied. But I think it's important that this foundation maintain complete independence. No conflicts of interest, no complicated relationships that might compromise its mission. 3 weeks later, the Welcome Home Project held its first public event, a fundraising dinner that drew military families, veterans organizations, and community leaders from across Texas. We raised $50,000 in a single evening, money that would go directly to providing support services for key military families in crisis. But the real news broke the next morning. I stood before a room full of reporters and cameras, flanked by Colonel Blackwood and the core members of the Sentinels. Behind me, a presentation screen displayed the first slide of what we had titled Operation Integrity, a comprehensive investigation into fraudulent practices targeting military families and veterans programs. My husband died defending the values that make America great, I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. Those values include honesty, accountability, and the sacred trust between those who serve and those who support them. Today, we expose a systematic pattern of betrayal of that trust. The next 30 minutes changed everything. We presented documented evidence of David's construction company billing the government for veteran housing projects that were never completed. We showed records of Eleanor's foundation diverting donations intended for military family support into personal accounts. We provided testimony from veterans who had been promised housing that didn't exist, from donors who believed their money was helping heroes but was actually funding luxury vacations. As I spoke, I watched David and Eleanor's carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Their phones buzzed constantly as reporters called for comment. Their lawyers were probably already drafting statements denying everything. But the evidence was overwhelming and indisputable. This isn't about personal vengeance, I concluded. This is about justice for the veterans and military families who were betrayed by people they trusted. My husband didn't die so that opportunists could profit from the sacrifice of others. The FBI arrests happened simultaneously with the press conference. As I was taking questions from reporters, David was being led out of his office building in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled and his face pale with shock. Eleanor was arrested at her country club, surrounded by the same social circle she had worked so hard to impress. The footage of their arrests dominated the evening news cycle. The contrast between Eleanor's perfectly styled hair and the metal handcuffs was jarring, symbolic of the gap between appearance and reality that had defined their lives. Public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Military families who had been victimized by similar schemes came forward with their own stories. Federal investigators announced that the Miller case was part of a larger crackdown on fraud targeting veterans programs. Congress scheduled hearings on oversight and accountability in military family support services. But the most meaningful response came from the military community itself. Donations to the Welcome Home Project increased exponentially. Volunteers stepped forward from every branch of service. Within 6 months, we had chapters in 15 states and had assisted over 2,000 military families. David was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the government programs he had defrauded. Eleanor received 3 years and forfeiture of all assets derived from her fraudulent foundation. Their business empire, built on the exploitation of military families, was dismantled piece by piece. I felt no satisfaction in their punishment, only relief that justice had been served. 1 year after John's death, I stood before the largest gathering in Welcome Home Project history. 5,000 people filled a convention center in Dallas, time 0.3s, representing every branch of military service and every chapter of our organization. We were announcing the opening of our first permanent family support center, a facility that would provide everything from temporary housing to job placement services for military families in transition. As I looked out at the audience, I saw Colonel Blackwood in the front row, still in uniform, still serving his country and his Marines. I saw Marcus and Lisa and Tony, the sentinels who had become my chosen family, who had taught me that strength comes from standing together rather than standing alone. I saw hundreds of military families who had found help when they needed it most, who had discovered that being connected to the military community meant never having to face crisis alone. 3 years ago, I began. I learned a painful lesson about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose. I learned that love isn't about shared genetics or social obligations. It's about showing up. It's about presence. It's about choosing to stand with someone when standing alone would be easier. I paused, touching the necklace I wore every day now, a simple pendant engraved with John's name and the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis. My husband died believing in something bigger than himself. He died believing that service to others, loyalty to your brothers and sisters in arms, and commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves are the highest callings a person can answer. The Welcome Home Project exists to honor that belief. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. Today, I wake up every morning in a house filled with photographs of the real family I have built. Pictures from Marine Corps birthday balls, where I'm surrounded by men and women who served with John, who consider me their sister because I was his wife. Images from Welcome Home Project events, where military families celebrate milestones they never could have reached alone. Photos of graduations and weddings and baby showers for the extended family of choice that grew out of shared commitment to service and mutual support. David served his full sentence and now works as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm in a town where no one knows the Miller name. Eleanor lost everything: her social status, her financial security, her reputation. They have become strangers to me, their absence from my life as complete as if they had never existed. But their absence doesn't create emptiness. It creates space for authentic relationships, for people who understand that love is demonstrated through actions rather than proclaimed through words. The Welcome Home Project now operates in all 50 states and has assisted over 40,000 military families. We've prevented suicides, stopped foreclosures, reunited families, and provided hope in circumstances that seemed hopeless. Every success story validates the choice I made to transform personal pain into public service. John's flag still sits in a place of honor in my home, but it's surrounded now by the symbols of the life I've built in his memory. Awards from veterans organizations, letters from military families we've helped, pictures of graduations and achievements by people who needed support to reach their potential. The scar from my family's betrayal remains, but it no longer defines me. Instead, it reminds me daily that survival isn't enough, transformation is possible. It reminds me that the greatest revenge against those who abandon you is building something beautiful with the people who choose to stay. I learned that family isn't about blood or obligation or maintaining appearances. Family is about choosing to show up, especially when showing up is difficult. Family is about presence in the moments that matter most. Family is about understanding that sometimes the people who love you best are the people who choose you rather than the people who are genetically programmed to. Most importantly, I learned that John's death wasn't the end of our story together. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where his values of service and loyalty and integrity live on through the work we do every day to support the military community he loved. I am no longer the woman who begged for acceptance from people incapable of real love. I am the woman who learned that the family you build is more valuable than the family you inherit. And that woman has finally found her way home. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. Time 0.4s. To the values John died defending, to the community that embraced me when blood family failed, and to the belief that sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing to keep going when everything seems lost. That choice has made all the difference.